Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So tonight we have with us two of our very frequent co-hosts, Mr. Mike Christensen. How you doing, Mike?
Good evening.
It's
Doing well, thank you.
good to have you back, and it's good that your microphone is powered on today. And
Yes.
we have in that direction Mala Mahadevan. How you doing, Mala?
Doing all right. How's everybody this evening?
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to speak on behalf of chat because chat hasn't spoken yet. Speaking of which, this is a chat-driven broadcast. The idea here is, do you have questions? Do you want to talk about a particular topic? Do you want to try to wind me up and get me to rant about something? Chat is awesome. I agree, Anders. And
Yeah, those were the two people I was looking for. Good evening, Solomon and Anders.
so, chat-driven, try to wind me up. Trust me, today we're going to get a rant. I've got on here a topic that I put on here specifically because I was going to rant about it. So you're not going to be able to derail me into a rant. I will be on the rant and you will derail me off of the rant. It'll be different. It's a little change of pace. But if you have questions, let's just not talk about my stock portfolio. Actually, it's kind of funny given one of the topics we have on the agenda tonight. Tabs and spaces. No, I mean, put it this way. I like tabs for some languages. Spaces are necessary for other languages. Deal with it. Just don't mix them.
Is that ASCII 32?
Yes, do not use vertical tabs for everything unless you want to mess with people. Now, if you want to mess with people, use vertical tabs. So with that, let's get this show on the road and talk about Anders' stock portfolio and how awful everything is. Now, our first thing we want to talk about tonight is something that Mala pointed out, and it's a pretty lengthy article by Rick Dobson about buy-sell model in T-SQL, which I thought was weird enough that I wanted to talk a little bit about it. So the gist of the article, and I guess I'll share my screen. We're gonna try this, people. We're gonna do that and share, and look at that. Look at that. We got a whole side of the screen now. So there's this long article. You're welcome to read it. I dropped a link in chat, and it has to do with a particular model. What I thought was interesting was the fact that they're using exponential moving average, and more importantly, that they're doing it in T-SQL, which I thought was interesting. It's not wrong
This
to do
seemed
it.
like, to me, it seemed like something people would do in R.
Yeah, this is exactly the type of thing that you would do in R or in Python because there are libraries which implement this directly. But if you wanted to do it directly in T-SQL, there is some code here. There's a stored procedure that he's got to generate using exponential moving average, a flow of what the results look like over time, where you have weights based on how old those records are. And he's got a few different periods. So period length in terms of days. I believe these are market days as opposed to calendar days. And looking at how to generate those results. Kind of an interesting article if you want to follow along with it. But that's probably all we're going to... I wrote an expected death procedure once. So something like survival analysis or just death pool. Because, those two, they are different. Annuity stuff. Okay. Yeah, annuities, that makes a lot of sense. So annuities are an area where survival analysis gets used very heavily, very frequently. And I could see, it'd be a little difficult, but I could see doing that, again, in T-SQL. Given that SQL's a domain-specific language for operating on data, yeah, the math behind your Cox function isn't that bad. It's not something that I would want to do in SQL unless I had to, but if you don't have R or Python or something like that at hand, then you work with the tools you got. Actually, along these lines, I do have to say I am currently Googling for my favorite article ever in terms of wacky ideas that you can do with T-SQL, and that is this Gail Shaw article from 13 years ago about building a genetic algorithm in T-SQL. Now, the part that really warms the cockles of my heart is the fact that genetic algorithms and genetic programming, it's been a topic I've been into for at least 17 years now, and was the basis of my thesis. So anytime I see genetic algorithms, I say, this is nice. Neural networks have effectively taken over almost 100% of the cases where genetic algorithms would have been used. But you know what? I'm still going to roll with this because genetic algorithms is just a fun concept.
Was there a genetic deficiency?
So the idea is that you have notions of reproduction and mutation based on determining a fitness function. So actually, here's a good example. If you have an encoded string of behaviors, and those behaviors would be how you could analogize it as, say, operators in a function, operators in a mathematical function, or you could have it be items in a knapsack if you're talking about the traveling knapsack problem. You can have problems like that as long as you can break it down into a fairly consistent encoding. Then what you're able to do is crack them at certain points, at certain pivot points, and mutate them in certain areas. And then you generate a fitness function of how well did that perform. And the ones that performed better get to reproduce more than the ones that performed worse. And so over time, what you end up with is something that approximates a really good solution. Traveling knapsack, is that like a slow-moving traveling salesman problem? No, it's more like it's the backpack problem. And actually, I think she has it in here. Nope. Okay. The backpack problem or the knapsack problem is the idea that you have a certain amount of space in a backpack and you have a certain number of items. And so which items will you fit into this backpack to maximize some sort of function? Like I need to maximize caloric intake, or I need to maximize some broad definition of utility. And so you're trying to figure out, well, based on the volume and the mass of particular objects, how can I best fill this thing? Kindle plus credit card plus passport. I mean, that's fine until the bear arrives. So Kindle plus credit card plus passport plus, what are you going to need for that? 44 probably? I don't think I'd go much lower than 44 on a bear. Depends on the type of bear, I suppose. But that's something that we're not going to find in this example. But the really fun thing about this, the reason I bring up this article, is that Gail actually has a separate article that is an implementation of, there we are. This is the one. An implementation of genetic algorithms. Yeah, this is it. The backpack problem or the knapsack problem. A genetic algorithm implementation entirely in T-SQL. And it's insane. And I love it. So if you want that, I'll drop a link to it in chat. Again, not something you should do, but something you can do, and therefore it's kind of fun. So similarly, exponential moving average, probably much more of in the sane side than the wacky side, at least compared to implementing genetic algorithms, which is already pretty slow in Java or in C. Doing that in T-SQL is really crazy, but also really cool. And therefore, I like it. Seal of approval on that one. So, all right. Next article. Because, this one, I don't know. Mala, did you want to add anything to this article on buy-sell model and financial securities and the like?
No, Kevin. My only thought about that was that it was a smart way of doing it, but when we have languages that like R and Python, why would somebody go to this extent with T-SQL? That was literally my only thing. I don't even know some of the terms that he's using here, so I don't have anything more to say beyond that.
Fair enough. And I guess what I would say is it's kind of cool that you can do it. I'm not sure that it needs to be in SQL. However,
Right, that was my thought. I'm glad that you share that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but if it's if it's the tool that you've got, so be it.
Well, you could, if you had a group of that were really strong in SQL, that might make sense. It would feel like the limited knowledge of R I have so far is like it'd be a lot less verbose. I mean, like you would be able to do some of these things in fewer steps. Is that what you mean by doing it in R? Just because R is purpose-built statistical software?
Exactly. So when it comes to exponential moving average in R, let's put this right here. There's a nice article. This is the first article that showed up in Google. I'm going to assume it's a nice article, but we have our data frame, and you can use the moving average function in the practical MA package and just say, here's a moving average where you have the specification. So this is an example where, all right, we're going to do 4-day exponentially weighted moving average, and it's a one-liner built off of a data frame versus having to write the T-SQL code yourself.
Yeah, which is a lot of debugging and testing, yeah.
Yeah. Now, that said, you know what? If you want to learn T-SQL a little bit better, want to work with different pieces of it, and here's your project, okay, that's fine. If it's just I have a SQL database and I don't have access to R in whatever environment, all right, that so be it. But probably not the best tool for the job. Though as a thought experiment, Solomon says, it is interesting sometimes to do impractical things in T-SQL or other languages, as it might lead to learning tricks of said language that can be used in practical ways. That's a good point. And I guess it kind of goes back to where I was going with, hey, if this is a way of learning, I mean, you don't necessarily know where the boundaries are until you get to them. There are people who can advise you that, I don't know that I would do it this way. But then again, looking at the code, I mean, review of this code here, actually it's a little bit higher up. It's not like the operation is insane. There's a fair amount of execution of different, actually it's even the stored procedure up above. Yeah, there's a little bit involved with it, but not a whole lot. So, this is not a case where, I'm doing something that's way outside of T-SQL's wheelhouse. It's a little bit outside. It's a thing where other languages have built-in functionality to do it for you. But yeah, I think it's also a reasonable way if you want to learn a little bit more about SQL. See a particular use case for example, working with window functions here. Might give you some clue or insight. This is how new languages get started. There has to be a better language for doing this.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you create a new language, and it turns out that both of them are bad.
Some years ago, couple of years ago, I started. Some of us started doing this whole advent of code thing that comes out during the holidays using T-SQL. That's actually not. Most of those problems are not T-SQL friendly at all. They are meant for other programming languages. But we tried to mess around with T-SQL. We learned a bunch of stuff, and our solutions were not elegant. They were certainly not the best for that kind of a problem. But we learned a few things about T-SQL doing it. That's all.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Advent of code. So let me see if I can find anybody who had their examples. I know Wayne Sheffield had some of them.
Yeah, Wayne and I were the ones who got started with that. I'll post one or two, one or two. I was wondering who was the person who wrote it, but then oh yeah, it was Wayne.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's a link to one of Wayne's blog posts that I happened to pull up on Curated
I'll
SQL.
post one of mine.
And
Friend.
and so, it's like here, recursive replacing, not a type of thing that you would want to do in T-SQL typically. I mean, considering there's a while loop, there's a little bit of wacky operations here. It's not going to be incredibly easy to understand, and so much easier to do in other languages, in structured languages. And Mala's got her link there. So let me bring this up as well. In the meantime, NanoDBA asks, any suggested references or favorite techniques to deal with an anti-pattern of all things in all tables for all time without code changes? Oof.
What does that mean?
We're using a lot of hardware for large joins where most of the data is not used. Assume that most data 3 years or older is not frequently accessed.
So are finding anti-patterns in data or design or what?
So it sounds like you've got, if I understand this right, there's a bunch of tables. Things are not archived. Old data is not archived out. And having to parse through all of this data.
Poor design. Well, if it's poor design and if it's SQL Server, then you can consider what I was talking about last year. Script DOM is that's meant for that purpose, for finding bad patterns. If you know what those patterns are.
Well, this is more of a he's aware of the pattern, is aware of the fact that there is a problem, and
he wants to know how to fix it.
Yeah. So
Okay,
there's all this data in these tables,
yeah.
and large joins. Most of the data is not used. I mean, I would say I can give you general advice. A couple of pieces of general advice. One possibility could be that you're able to use something like breaking out that data into separate tables and then using a view to combine them together, sort of the SQL 2000 partitioning. And let me pull up an example of how you can do that. Specifically, this is around Polybase, but it gives you an idea in terms of the structure. It doesn't have to be from Polybase, but here's a script just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Cold storage. So create the view and the new SQL tables. So you have these tables. What you would add is a check constraint for whatever date. I assume that there's some date that indicates this is when this thing was, and that this date is often used for analysis. If you're never looking on a date, then date-based partitioning built into T-SQL or built into SQL Server or where you roll your own, not going to help you very much. But if there's an assumption that almost every query looks at date, you can create new tables with a check constraint that says your date must be between A and B. And then you can create a view, and in the view specify, okay, select from this table where the dispatch date time is greater than or equal to this and the dispatch date time is less than this. And then when you query that view, what ends up happening is that when you pass in a dispatch date time, the database engine knows I only need to hit this table because that's the range, or I need to hit this table and this table because that's the range. So that is an option where your code still views this view as a table, and underneath you can break that out into multiple tables. You could potentially put it on different tiers of archival or storage, where some are faster tier because it's more recent data, some is a little bit slower because it's unused or less frequently used data. But even if you don't do that, at least it cuts down the size of a given table by a certain amount. If, however, you don't have any sort of operation off of where most of your queries are date based or filterable in some fashion, it could be a date, it could be an integer. Technically, it could be an integer if it's monotonically increasing over time. But if you don't have that scenario, there's not a whole lot that you can necessarily do. A lot of these are date based. Yeah, so for those, this is an option. It might not be a fix. The problem is the answer is going to depend on what's the specific nature of those queries, how the queries are generated. Does the optimizer know about the date ranges, or is it something where that's not known until runtime? Because if so, like if you're sending in begin dates and end dates in a stored procedure, the optimizer may not be able to parse them out unless you have something execute with recompile on a stored procedure, for example. So
Can I interrupt for a second?
please do.
I missed a key thing. So why you made it? You made a procedure that made a view, but why are you saying it treats it like a table for the optimizer?
So what happens is that when you create these tables, let's say that I broke out this data by year. So in this case, my T-SQL query, this create view statement, is actually querying a bunch of underlying tables. So I've broken out that data by year. And
Okay.
the view is the union all of all of these tables with a where clause for each of the years or each of the time periods.
Mm-hmm.
And so that view is just a stored query. And so the database engine will look at that view, and especially if it's a relatively simple query. If it's a really complex
Right.
query, things get
Right.
hairy.
That's where. Yep. Okay.
But if it's a simple enough query, this view interjoined to several lookup tables or to several other sort of dimensional tables, then based on what you send in that where clause for the relevant date is going to automatically eliminate some of these partitions.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Something similar can happen with SQL Server partitioning. The problem is that's not necessarily it's not necessarily going to be a performance improvement.
That's a lot of work, right?
Yeah, it
Partitioning never helped with performance.
rarely helps with performance. There are
Right.
some cases it's not intended to be a performance improvement. There are
Correct.
some cases where, by the way, you get a performance improvement, but there's never a case where partitioning was intended to be you will get a performance improvement the way that SQL Server implements it. This view-based partitioning actually can be a little bit of a performance improvement because it's the alternative between you're scanning one huge table and you're scanning a couple of segments within a huge table because you're going to two separate tables. So you're looking at a much smaller range of data. Considering a view that was a union with a clustered column store index. So where the clustered column store index is going to be better is if almost all of your queries are summations or aggregations, And the table that you're putting the CCI on has no string values. If it's all numbers and dates, then column store index can be a really good choice. Could pack things down. But if you're looking at single row point lookups, clustered column store indexes are really bad at that. If you're looking at long string columns on your table, column store indexes are terrible with that. So it'd be a thing to keep in mind. But if you're dealing with a classic fact table where it's all numbers and dates and relatively simple data types like that, and maybe you have like a 5-character string, a few of those, and that is low cardinality. In that case, yeah, column store index could be really good. A clustered column store index would work great because you're performing aggregations over large ranges of data. However, if you're looking at a lot of point lookups or you've got problems like that, the CCI is probably going to be worse for you. So again, will depend on the nature of the queries and the nature of the table itself.
So Grant Fitchie's not here tonight, but I would like on his behalf to say thank you for not using between in that query, because he has a whole rant about between.
Yeah. So the problem with between, and the reason why I wrote it this way, is between is inclusive. It's inclusive on both sides. And so if I said 2007-01-01 and 2008-01-01, then I would have some overlap with the next set. Anything that had 2008-01-01 at 12 a.m. would be right in here. If I said between 2007-01-01 and 2007-12-31-11:59, anything is like 11:59.999 seconds is going to be missed altogether. So you end up in this bad situation where I'm either potentially duplicating rows or I'm potentially missing rows because of my use of the word between. Where instead, if I just specify greater than or equal to on one side and less than on the other, now I can guarantee that there's no overlap and there's no missing value.
Yeah, I had a code review and the person said that I needed to use between to make the query. And I kind of rarely do this, but I was like, okay, let me explain why I'm not.
We use a bunch of between where I am too. It's among the things I don't like personally, but I've not seen a case where it's used for like changing values of. Usually they use it for values that are fixed, and I think that's kind of okay.
It can be okay, yeah. And
yeah.
In the healthcare data,
if you're calling it repeatedly with different values, then you miss stuff like what Kevin said. But the same value, okay, you know what it's doing, and that's all it's meant to do. So.
So Solomon says clustered column store indexes using the archival option is good for large string values as it does compress them more than other options, but it's probably not the best if there are updates. Yeah, if there's any sort of update, archival mode, not so great. So my assumption is you're working on a table that is still active, and I wouldn't even think about archival. You could think of archival on older partitions of data that don't get updated. They're several years old. That could be beneficial. But again, that's also a scenario where you're doing large aggregations as opposed to single row point lookups. All right.
All right, everybody, get ready.
I'm warming up. I'm doing my jumping jacks here.
He's stretching for the epic rant.
We are waiting, Kevin.
All right. So I promised this behind the scenes. I did promise this. This is something we were going to talk about a couple of weeks ago, but then we had the opportunity to chat with Kevin Klein, and I decided talking to Kevin Klein for an hour is way better than talking about ChatGPT. However, given the fact that there have been like 9,000 blog posts about ChatGPT, and let me try it for this scenario and that scenario and all of these scenarios, I figured I would come here and become the wet blanket for ChatGPT. The person who says, this is really dumb, And here's why you probably shouldn't use it for anything other than for the lulls. Mike will be on the other side, contra wet blanket. So I
That's
guess
pretty scary going against Kevin, but I'll give it a try.
Mike, I suppose is the analogy here would be more like the towel, attempting to
Exactly.
deal with the after effects of the wet blanket. So
Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm just putting everything in ChatGPT, tell me what to say.
So if you're not familiar, if you've been under a rock for the last month, that's good on you. You're probably winning. But the OpenAI project has been working on a language model for a while, and they have made it pretty much generally available to the public. So there are a few different ways that you can work with this. Microsoft has their implementation, and I know that there are a couple of other websites where you can try it out. The basic concept here is a model of language that has been trained on an enormous amount of data and has been trained in such a way that it receives natural language prompts from people and generates text outputs, which on its own I don't have a problem with. I mean, I enjoyed playing with Eliza on Emacs when I was growing up, so I don't have a problem with hey internet tool, create something that's kind of interesting. And there have been previous examples of fun little things, like I actually have to see. I had a nice article that was something. I'm not gonna spoil it here. Here we are. Okay. This is one of my favorite troll websites, and the troll website here. I'll give you a link. This is a Markov chain that generates postmodern blog posts, which, in fairness, probably makes about as much sense as a human writing postmodernist in that style. So this is all just garbage that's put together by a machine as opposed to garbage put together by a human, and has been around for a while. I mean, this at least here, let me see when I wrote this post. This was several years ago. This was 2019. So that website's been around for a while. The idea of using tools like Markov chains or generative neural networks, this has been around for a little bit. And again, that's not a problem. What the problem is ascribing meaning or truth to the outputs of the language model. ChatGPT is a language model system. It is not a truth system. Therefore, what you will find is people will be like, hey, ChatGPT, give me the 10 greatest articles on this topic. And it will generate 10 articles on the topic, of which you may later find that several of them do not actually exist, that they are words that were smooshed together because these words typically go together on this topic. And as a result, you go and you turn that in to your professor as, here's my bibliography, and then you fail because you were an idiot trying to use a language model to perform your research. And that you should grow up and do what the professionals do, and that is you get grad students to do that work for you. So now the next question is ChatGPT better than a grad student? Wait, I'm getting a call from Brian Wansink here. By the way, if you don't know who that is, I'm going to drop a link in chat because this guy, I don't remember if plagiarism was involved in this, but this guy was big on writing papers involving food. Like, oh, well, if you eat green foods, then you're more likely to be fat than people who don't eat the green foods on a Tuesday. And he had a bunch of published papers where it turns out that the data was fake, where it turns out that people mistyped numbers so that they could get results that just happened to fit. The statistical modeling behind it was bunk. It was just a bunch of trash. But yeah, people eat more when they're served in large bowls and when they're watching an action movie. This was the type of paper that he would write, and it was kind of in that Freakonomics setting where I want to write something that's cool and engaging and it's going to drag people in, except he didn't have cool and engaging ideas, so he had to make it up. So, but it was all the fault of his grad students who were putting in fake data. At least that was the original blame. Nonetheless, that rant aside, the ultimate fake it until you make it. Yeah, I mean, he faked it, then he made it, then he continued faking it because, it got him so far. Which, going back to ChatGPT, that's kind of what happens. It is taking this language, it's taking words and word constructs and the way that words tend to fit together and applying it in a way which does not have any sense of understanding. There is no being behind it. I mean, I'm trying not to get too metaphysical or philosophical here, but there's no there. It is just a language model. And so if you treat it as just a language model, give me something that maybe is in the style of Seinfeld and it's like a Seinfeld episode. And then it'll generate something out and like, oh, this looks just like a Seinfeld episode because I fed it all of the episodes of Seinfeld and it created something that had Kramer coming in and it was all funny and all the people were awful to each other. And I can't believe we watched this all for 10 years, knowing how terrible these people were to everybody. Which, by the way, was kind of the lesson of Seinfeld. Why did we watch it for 10 years knowing that all these people were terrible and they never grew up?
Growing up's overrated.
Ha!
You have to do sequel.
So AI has been used for 20 years pushing out hit songs. I mean, I'm not going to say it hasn't been. But basically, centering my rant, this is not a truth model. Don't use it as a truth model. Where can you use this? Hey, here, create a fake Seinfeld episode. Create a Hallmark movie. Yeah. BuzzFeed and a few other sites have been starting. I think Wired is actually starting to use ChatGPT generated articles, which makes perfect sense because, like I said, there's no truth value to these articles and they're written as though an idiot wrote them, which is basically what we mean when we say a Wired employee or a BuzzFeed employee. So I don't see any loss of value in that regard. Yeah, you put out trash that has no truth value. Great, have a machine do it. What about using ChatGPT for coding?
All right, so do I get to...
Yes, Mike.
All right, you
you're going to have to fight your way in here, Mike.
Woo. All right, so the three of us were talking early, and I have used ChatGPT. I used it for a few hours, and I watched a couple of videos by some programmers and some greatest hits, right? The counterpoint is that absolutely yes, and everything Kevin is saying is true. It is a language model, and I guess it's probably predicting what statistically likelihood the next word to give you is. But there are some seeming value in terms of like saving time and reducing grunt work is kind of what I was telling folks at Duke. So, for example, you could say if you're doing PowerShell and then you're doing Linux or you're doing Mac and the terminal commands are slightly different and you kind of, what is the code to print a working directory in PowerShell, and it will give you example code. And of course, you have to have the skill set, right? So if I said, write me a function in C# that, added all these numbers and then divide, and did a number of steps, you have to like make sure you understand C# to make sure that it's right. And also it has bias because some, Python is open. They can look and get and train the model. They can't really train the model as much on Java, right? Because that's a little bit more proprietary and less available for them to read the data. So it'll tell you that it's good at certain things more than other things. The other use case that I found for it was, there's like some robust testing that you can do with it. So you can say, create me, 10 fake rows for this table, and you can tell it like this table has an integer and it's a first name, last name, date of birth, and it can generate fake data for you. You can also do function testing. So you can say, well, I have this function in Python called foo, and it does this. Can you create 5 test cases for it? There's other things that I tried with it that were kind of like more on a market, what I would say like maybe for a marketing role. So the example I just was goofing around. I was like, I want to start a cucumber farm. What would you call it? And they gave, a bunch of names, and I asked it questions from, my growing up, like what are some popular bands, that are classic rock. So, right, it's reading all this information and then assimilating it from years and years of books and data. But I will tell you what I just asked it and see what everybody thinks. See if there's any errors in this. Do you know what SQL Server Pass Summit is what I asked.
Mm.
The answer is yes, I am familiar with the SQL Server Pass Summit. It's an annual conference for SQL Server professionals organized by the Professional Association for SQL Server, PASS, a global community of data professionals who use the Microsoft Data Platform. And on. But it doesn't look like anything's incorrect, but essentially it's scraping that from the internet or it learned that.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays it's not pass. There is no pass.
What is it now? This is 2 years old.
It's Redgate.
ChatGPT.
There is no, the organization died. So that's what it should be telling you, is that the organization went bankrupt in 2020 and does not exist anymore.
Well, it's 2 years old, all the data. Yeah. Who runs the Pass Summit? It's organized by the Professional Association for SQL Server Pass. All right. This is not helping with against Kevin. It's a not-for-profit community organization that is run by a group of volunteers. Okay.
Ask it, what is the website for Pass?
The website.
So
Pass the SQL Server group.
We'll do that, and then there's some nice chat in here.
Pass.org.
It's not totally wrong because they bought that URL.
Yeah, I'm going to open that up in a new tab. So they do call it the Pass Data Community Summit, but yeah, there's no Pass anymore. The organization died.
Pass.org. Yeah. So yeah, ChatGPT is about 2 years old. They say it's trained on data. It only goes up to 2020 or something like that. So
this is a case where, again, you know what? That's about what I would expect from like Wired. Bad, out of date information that ultimately looks like a human may have written.
You want to get clicks, yeah.
In the aim of getting clicks, exactly. So
you won't believe what insurance people are getting in Durham. It's just to sell ads.
Yeah, number 2 will shock you. And yeah, okay, a computer can write that stuff because it's garbage. It is semantically of light meaning and ultimately frivolous. So, what about, Anders, have I got an article for you? This is actually another link in here, but I got to talk about this stuff in chat first. So using ChatGPT for coding, Solomon has a link to a video. I will check out that video. I am very skeptical on the whole about the idea. Where I could see it being beneficial is I already have a good enough notion of the language that I can move on it. The problem is, and Enhanced QC mentions this, be careful with coding for work stuff. Our lawyers have already come through and nixed the dev team using ChatGPT until IP wrinkles are ironed out. Similarly, GitHub Copilot is running into this type of problem where they trained, hey, let's train a generative AI model on all of this code that's available in GitHub repos. And the problem is all of that code has different licenses. So if you ask, hey, Copilot, write me a function that does X, and it writes you a function that does that, first, let's assume that the function actually works and doesn't have security problems. Let's leave that aside. I mean, this is essentially, I'm copying from Stack Overflow. So you know what, my low-end developers who are doing the same thing, they're just copying from Stack Overflow. They're probably going to get the same security flaws. So it'll be even in that regard. But the problem is, if it got that function in part from an AGPL library, well, that's an issue, because now, oh, you have AGPL code in your code base, and your closed source proprietary code base is violating the terms of AGPL. So you have this risk on what was this code trained on? How was it trained? What was the process? And how similar is that code to the code that is AGPL licensed or GPL3 licensed? Stuff that you can't just copy and paste blocks of code out of an AGPL library and say, this is mine. Oracle got sued for that stuff. Google got sued for that stuff. So not the type of thing that you really want to necessarily run as a risk for your company. And NanoDBA says, my wife is helping draft an AI policy at her law school due in large part to ChatGPT usage. So there are legal aspects to this that we're going to have to work through. And by we, I mean other people, because I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to sit on the sidelines, Statler and Waldorf style, and laugh at these people, because that is my role in life. I've always thought of myself more as a Waldorf than a Statler, but I will happily fill either role depending on what's necessary at the time.
No, are they Broadway people like Bernstein and Hammerstein?
No, from the Muppets. They were the two old men who sat up in the balcony and yelled. They were the hecklers. Waldorf was the guy with the mustache.
I don't even think that was a movie.
The main reason for it is to suck up capital and make a few people lots of money. That's the next article. We're going to get to that, Anders. So Enhanced QC, I wouldn't have a problem with the model stopping at 2019, before humanity lost its mind and thought they would never die. I've grown to believe that the world really did end in 2012, and that we ended up on some weird timeline. But that's for another day.
What's about 2012?
It's peak. Well, it was peak SQL Server.
Yeah, it was the Mayan calendar. Mayan calendar ran out, and boom, no more dates.
Oh, Mayan calendar. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. Well, I'm with them with what he's saying, that nobody thought they'd die until 2019.
Huh.
I'm totally with that.
So Anders says, I think Copilot has more issues in this regard. And Solomon, but how do you know the source of the output given by ChatGPT code? That's the thing. That's the neat thing. You don't. And that's where you get into the lawsuits. Because if that ChatGPT code looks very similar to the code that I wrote in my library that happened to be published in GitHub and is AGPL, I can say this block of code and this block of code are either the same block of code, or you tried to obfuscate it by changing a variable. If it's the same functional set of code, there's potential for a lawsuit here. You may not win the lawsuit. You might win the lawsuit. I mean, that's a big question. And I think it's an open question at this point of how likely is it that you do get sued? And if you do get sued, how likely is it that you win it or not? If I was just using what Copilot told me, well, I mean, Copilot has been part of lawsuits. Let me pull up my search here. And This is The Verge. Speaking of places written by OpenAI, being sued for allegedly violating copyright law. And yeah, this is a pretty big issue depending on what happens with this suit. It may not actually get anywhere for another 5 years or so, but large chunks of copyrighted code with no attribution, no license. And again, this is LGPL. This is not something where you can just take it and paste it in your own private code base. So it's in its early stages. I don't know what's going to happen with that lawsuit, but there's it's going to be interesting to see.
What is the link for the thing that you posted, Kevin? The lawsuit?
The lawsuit, here, let me paste it in chat right there. But can you really prove that two pieces of code are the same if there's no direct link? While unlikely, didn't two people unknown to each other design and apply for the patent of the first TV? That happens a fair amount of the time where two people can invent a thing independently. The question would be, for a block of code like this, what's the likelihood that two people are going to create that block of code? And it may be a little bit hard to see. I tried to zoom in as much as I could, but this thing on the right, the GitHub Copilot version on the right, in case if the font is too blurry because of...
Is that C++?
This is C.
Okay.
Yeah, this is C code. So the stuff on the left looks extremely similar to the stuff on the right. And this is not Hello World. This is matrix transposition. So likely that, a person can look at this and say, yeah, sparse matrix operations. Yeah, this is probably coming from that library. I know the ultimate answer to these questions, but it would completely derail this fun conversation. Ultimate answer is who's got more money, who's got more time, and who's willing to take it to court more effectively. And then judges will come up with something stupid because they don't understand the problem any better than we do. So we're all screwed. That's the hill I'm going to be on. The we're all screwed hill. But Enhanced QC, I would actually be happy to hear what your thoughts are on the matter because...
Wow, we were allowed to have thoughts.
Well, you're allowed to have thought. It's just my intent in life to destroy it all. At least hope. Hope and ambition, all that stuff, boom. I suppose if the comments are the same, then it's hard to argue they were different sources. Yeah, and again, this is... You can get to a point of... How functionally different is this? How many different ways are there to perform matrix operations? But when you look at this and like this is a whole block of code that is just copied and pasted, that was a problem for, if I remember right, it was Oracle, where they were taking open source code and just like copying and pasting it willy-nilly in their code base. And ended up getting sued for it once they had to release source code for some of the stuff. I think it might have been around Java. I'm blanking on the specifics.
I think when Amazon took all Hallengren's code and put it in the index maintenance, but forgot to remove the comment that said it was his name.
Oops.
that became public. And then they had to acknowledge that they took his code.
Yeah, I mean,
Amazon, a $1 billion company, is stealing stuff from a small-time consultant.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, that happens. That happens. And IP is against nature. There's no scarcity with ideas. I am willing to subscribe to your newsletter on this one, Enhanced QC. I have I have a complex hate relationship with intellectual property law. And it's probably beyond what we can talk about here. And it's probably beyond what I can talk about at a reasonable level. But I might be beyond it. So Anders says, so we need NFTs for code. Blockchain was the answer to everything before this. leads me right into
comedian.
Charlie Strauss's blog post here, where the first paragraph, the thing I find most suspicious about the current hype surrounding Stable Diffusion, ChatGPT, and other AI applications is that it's almost exactly 6 months since the bottom dropped out of the cryptocurrency scam bubble. This is not a coincidence. Yeah, I tend to agree with Charlie on this article, and I'm going to paste a link to it here in chat. Let me grab a copy of it. I have made my computer very angry because I tried increasing the font size on here, apparently. So let's see if I can regain control of it. There we go. So the gist of this article, and I recommend reading it. It's a little polemical, I'll put it that way. But the idea here in this article is that once all of those crypto scams started falling apart, people needed new ways to get money, and investors need new ways to funnel money into projects that look like they're going to have massive returns. And so here's the new, we're going to use generative AI to solve problem X. We're going to use generative AI to create mortgage applications, or whatever dumb reason that is completely outside of the valid uses of this product. We're going to use OpenAI image generation to, I don't even know what. Now, I will say, I like Stable Diffusion. I've used it. It's pretty cool. It will generate, like, hey, I want to get something that's done in Dutch Renaissance style landscape of contemporary
A mouse
Manhattan.
riding a bike.
And so it'll do something. It'll generate something kind of like that. So that's kind of a fun use of it. But there's a lot of potential misuse of it as well. And that's where investing in AI startups, probably not a great idea unless you're absolutely certain you understand both the technology and the market for the proposed applications. So,
Well,
yeah.
This is a lot of extremes, right? Because like not all cryptocurrency is gone. I mean, certainly SFX was a big one, and there's been some issues for sure, but it's not all gone. And I think that there is legitimate AI that's being used, like in call centers. Is a good Wall Street Journal article about where the AI helps guide and reduces friction. So I just think that like there's going to be edge cases where it has value. Is it going to be is it going to like solve all our problems and make it so that we all play musical instruments all day and don't have to work? No. But it's going to get better and better. I mean, it's going to be a reality in our lives, like it or not.
Yeah, that's what I think. I agree with what Mike is saying.
I'm not sure how much better it will necessarily get. And what I base this on is there are two philosophies in artificial intelligence. This goes back at least to the 50s. Hard AI and soft AI. Where the idea is hard AI is thinking. Soft AI is faking. We can fake. We can create things that fake. I mentioned Eliza. Eliza's been around since the 70s. It can fake conversation. It's a little psychiatrist that talks to you on the computer, and it was built into Emacs.
Is this an Emacs?
Yeah. Now, Eliza existed before.
They
Emacs.
all need psychiatrists. Yeah.
Ha. Yeah. If you're an Emacs user, you probably do need a psychiatrist. I agree.
Thank you. I'll be here a week.
Ha. But the concepts of that soft AI, or weak AI. Yeah, I think that there are specific cases where this does work. That hard AI, I am a thinking creature and can operate independently and learn independently. I don't believe we're ever going to I don't think that's possible for a human to create. I don't think it's possible to generate. Now, am I correct on this? I've been right for 70 years. Or at least people like me have been right for 70 years. I suppose that doesn't forestall the concept that tomorrow it could be completely wrong, that there is, in fact, thinking AI. But I'm not going to put money on it. Everything that we've seen, this is part of why we had the AI winter of the 80s, that there was such a push on hard AI. And when people found out, oh, hard AI is a challenge, I wasn't going to go with the easy pun. Hard AI is a real challenge. Well, yeah, of course. And on my side, I'm like, yeah, of course, it's impossible. So this is something where, yes, there are specific cases where using AI makes a lot of sense. There are specific cases where we will apply AI to new and interesting problems and it will actually work. And there's the other 99% of cases where we're going to use AI to generate something and give me $3 million. So I do recommend reading the article, regardless of full agreement or not. I think it's at least an interesting read, and it is pretty close to my opinion on the process. That, yeah, it does some interesting things, but at the same time, comes at a very big cost in terms of what it takes to generate a model. And a lot of the people who are pushing it hardest happen to be the people who benefit the most from, using that cloud to train a new generative AI model, or buying the rig of GPUs to generate that new model. Any thoughts on international conventions around AI? So let's do this real brief and then wrap up. I think that people will come up with something and that they will be awful. The answers will be wrong and probably not useful. I just base that on a few thousand years of human history. ChatGPT breaking its rules during a role-playing game. If this is about something like Dan, yeah, ChatGPT, it gets spicy.
Oh, the Microsoft one was bad. Yeah. That was
yeah.
naughty.
Yeah.
You're wrong. You get the date wrong. It's like, no, you're wrong.
So I think I'm going to create a deep fake of Kevin waxing poetic about how ChatGPT is the savior of all humanity. Look, I'm willing to do that. I just need a couple $1 million in my bank account first. So
Yeah,
NVIDIA or whoever, hit me up. Like any new tech, there's a hype curve, then the adults are in charge again. Absolutely. And Gartner hype cycle. So let me pull up the Gartner hype cycle image. And then I will... hey, I could even pull up the hype cycle for emerging technologies. So let's see if they have a picture. They don't really have a good picture. But here's their illustration. Basically, you have the peak of inflated expectations and the trough of despair. This is about where we're at with cryptocurrencies and blockchain. This is about where we're at with generative AI, right about here. Well, the Gartner hype cycle, Gartner is kind of a meme, but the hype cycle is real, and they're going to go down this section of the hype cycle. Now, you do eventually climb out. Some technologies climb out of here, out of this trough, and eventually get into here is where it is reasonable to use a thing. And this is common for almost every tech. So very, very generally good. As a philosophy to believe in, that when you get up here at the peak, this is where all the investor money comes in, and then this is what happens in 6 months when all the investor money is gone. And the question that you ask yourself is, who's losing the money?
Meta, yeah. I'm thinking about VR headsets because I bought one, but I'm in the rare. Like it's not super common and it's not super useful yet.
Yeah,
the games aren't that good and all that.
I got into VR a little bit as well. I like the concept. I don't know that it's going to go incredibly far. Not until you have headsets that people can wear for more than an hour without getting a headache.
I legitimately, yes, I got sick.
Yeah,
so I stopped.
Sure. A large percentage of people end up having motion sickness or being physically ill as a result of just having the device in. It's part of it is resolution and refresh rate is just not quite right. AR, a little bit more positive about that, except that the glasses make you look like a derp And that's what happened with Google Glass. Also, the idea that you're a walking privacy violation. Hello, don't look at me because I don't want Apple looking at me or Google looking at me.
I agree with
That's
that.
right,
I use mine for at home, and you can use it for work stuff and everything. But I really did get it for fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I can see it all. I can see, you're a drafts person, and you go out to a building, and you can automatically measure walls, or
Right.
there's unlimited use cases for it. It's
Yes.
just it is a privacy nightmare.
Yep. I think AR's got a better life to it. It'll do better. But again, the equipment is too expensive and it's too early on. HoloLens was a massive failure because practical computers that you can put on don't really they don't exist yet. Where AR is most useful right now is actually on your phone. So something like Google Streets, where I'm lost. I'm not sure exactly where I am. You can hold up the phone and use your camera and say, "Oh, okay, based on that sign and that intersection, you're actually pointed this direction, even though GPS thinks you're going that way," and can help get you oriented.
You can design a room with an iPad. I've done that. You got it.
So let's wrap this up. Hadn't read through it yet. The 3 other conferences same week. Okay. Targeted ads. Yeah, I want targeted ads as well. Exactly. Anders, you're doing it right. So everybody, hopefully you enjoyed this. A little bit of ranting. Got a little bit of, telling the counter story from Mike, trying to take us back off the ledge, and me pushing us right back on that ledge. We're going ledge, people.
Try it though if you're interested on your non-work computer.
So
it's very easy to use.
Apparently, I did not make Anders' grade for rant quality. Remember that this is. I try not to swear.
It's okay, Anders. It's okay.
But all right, everybody. Hopefully, you have a great day.
Good night, everyone.
And until we see each other again, take care.
Growing up as always. Yep. All right, bye.